Before we begin, this series contains mature themes including infidelity, family betrayal, and emotional confrontation. Viewer discretion is advised. Disclaimer: this is a fictional narrative for educational and entertainment purposes. All legal strategies should be discussed with licensed attorneys in your jurisdiction. If you're experiencing similar situations, please seek professional support.
The judge looked at Dylan's attorney and said, "Counselor, are you seriously arguing that your client should retain rights to a property he planned to steal through forgery?" The courtroom went silent. Dylan's lawyer stammered. And I sat next to Sloan, barely breathing, as Judge Patricia Morrison reviewed the evidence I'd submitted. "I've been on the bench for 23 years. The judge continued. And I have never seen such a clear-cut case of fraud conspiracy documented by the perpetrators themselves. The audacity is almost impressive." But that wasn't even the most shocking moment. Because what happened when the judge heard the full recording, that's when her ruling became the weapon that ended this war once and for all. This is the story of how justice prevailed in a courtroom and how one judge's words validated everything I'd fought for. 3 weeks ago, I walked into Bethany's boutique relaunch with my attorney, process servers, and Leo, the man Bethany had been defrauding. I served her with eviction papers in front of 50 witnesses and our entire family. I played the recording of her and Dylan planning to forge my signature to steal my house. I exposed the year-long affair, the unpaid rent, and the pregnancy scandal. Leo confronted Bethany about the baby and the stolen $12,000. My mother chose to stand with me instead of enabling Bethany. But the legal battle wasn't over. Dylan filed motions to contest the postnuptial agreement. Bethany's attorney tried to argue the eviction was retaliatory, and they both demanded a hearing. Now, let me tell you what happened when we all ended up in front of Judge Patricia Morrison and how her ruling shocked everyone in that courtroom. Judge Patricia Morrison's courtroom was nothing like I'd imagined. No jury box, no dramatic lighting. Just a small, institutional room with fluorescent lights and uncomfortable chairs. But Judge Morrison herself was exactly what I needed her to be. A woman in her early 60s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and an expression that suggested she'd seen every manipulation tactic in the book and had no patience for any of them. Dylan sat with his attorney on one side. I sat with Sloan on the other. Bethany had been subpoenaed as a witness, though her attorney had already indicated she'd invoke her Fifth Amendment right on any questions about the fraud conspiracy. My mother sat in the back row. She looked exhausted, older, like the past 3 weeks had aged her years. But she was there, and she'd made her choice about whose side she was on. Elodie sat directly behind me, a steady presence at my back. Judge Morrison reviewed the files in silence for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she looked up. "Let me make sure I understand the facts," she said, her voice sharp and clear. "Mr. Reed, you engaged in an extramarital affair with your wife's sister for approximately 11 months. During this affair, you and Miss Hart discussed forging Mrs. Reed's signature on property documents. This conversation was recorded by Mrs. Reed on her own property. Is that correct?" Dylan's attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges the affair occurred, but the discussion about forging signatures was merely hypothetical. They never actually—" "Counselor," Judge Morrison interrupted, her voice cutting. "Are you seriously arguing that conspiracy to commit fraud is acceptable as long as it remains hypothetical?" "No, Your Honor, but the recording. The recording is clear evidence of intent," the judge said. "Intent to commit fraud, forgery, and identity theft. All felonies. But we'll come back to that." She turned to Bethany's attorney. "Counselor, your client is here under subpoena. Does she wish to testify?" Bethany's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client invokes her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination." "Of course she does," Judge Morrison said dryly. "How convenient." A few people in the gallery suppressed nervous laughter. Judge Morrison took a sip of water and consulted her notes. "Now, let's address Mr. Reed's motion to invalidate the postnuptial agreement," she said. "This should be interesting." The way she said "interesting" made it clear what she thought of Dylan's chances. Dylan's attorney had been arguing for weeks that the postnup was unconscionable, that Dylan hadn't understood what he was signing. That I'd pressured him during a vulnerable time after my father's cancer diagnosis. Your Honor, Dylan's attorney argued, the postnuptial agreement was signed 5 years ago, shortly after Mrs. Reed's father received a terminal diagnosis. Mr. Reed was emotionally vulnerable. He signed without fully understanding the implications of Clause 7.3, which essentially punishes him for. Stop, Judge Morrison said, holding up her hand. Just stop. I've reviewed the postnuptial agreement multiple times. Let me understand your argument. You're claiming your client didn't understand that adultery would have consequences? Your Honor, the clause is extremely punitive. The clause is written in plain English. The judge interrupted. She picked up the document and read aloud. In the event of adultery by either party, documented through credible evidence, the non-breaching party retains sole claim to all property held in separate trust, and the breaching party forfeits all claims to spousal support. Which word confused your client? Dylan's attorney opened his mouth, then closed it. Judge Morrison continued. This agreement was drafted by a licensed attorney. It was presented to Mr. Reed with a 2-week review period. He had ample opportunity to seek independent legal counsel. He chose not to. He signed it voluntarily in front of a notary and 2 witnesses. She looked directly at Dylan. Mr. Reed, did your wife threaten you, coerce you, hold a gun to your head? No, Your Honor. Dylan said quietly. Did she drug you, hypnotize you, use mind control? No, Your Honor. Then you signed this agreement of your own free will, correct? Yes, but I didn't fully understand. You didn't fully understand that cheating on your wife would have consequences? Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose. Mr. Reed, were you raised by wolves? Because most of us learn by kindergarten that our actions have consequences. Someone in the gallery snorted with laughter. Judge Morrison turned back to Dylan's attorney. Counselor, the clause is not punitive. It's protective. Mrs. Reed's father placed family property in an irrevocable trust to protect it from exactly this type of situation. The postnuptial agreement reinforces that protection. There is nothing unconscionable about a spouse wanting to ensure that family assets remain protected from marital claims. She closed the file with a sharp snap. The postnuptial agreement is valid and enforceable. Mr. Reed has no claim to Willow House or any assets held in the Willow Trust. He forfeits all rights to spousal support as specified in Clause 7.3. Motion denied. Dylan's face crumbled. Judge Morrison took another sip of water and consulted her notes again. Now let's address the eviction matter, she said. Miss Hart's attorney has made several creative arguments. Let's see if any of them hold water. The way she said creative made Bethany's attorney visibly uncomfortable. Bethany's attorney argued that the eviction was retaliatory, that I was only evicting her because of the affair, not because of legitimate lease violations. Your Honor, Bethany's attorney said, my client has been operating her business in good faith. The lease agreement was essentially a family arrangement. Mrs. Reed never formally demanded rent until after she discovered the affair. The timing suggests. Suggests what? Judge Morrison interrupted. That Mrs. Reed should have continued to allow her sister to operate rent-free after discovering she was sleeping with her husband? That seems like an unreasonable expectation, Counselor. Your Honor, I'm simply pointing out. Let me point out something to you, the judge said. I have the lease agreement right here. Signed by both parties. Notarized. Filed with the county clerk. It is not essentially anything. It is a legally binding contract with explicit terms. She held up the document. Rent is due on the 1st of every month in the amount of $3,900. Miss Hart has not paid rent in 11 consecutive months. That's $43,000 in arrears. Show me one email, one text message, one piece of documentation that suggests Mrs. Reed agreed to defer or forgive this rent. Bethany's attorney shuffled papers desperately. We don't have written documentation, Your Honor, but there was an understanding between family members. There was no understanding. Judge Morrison said flatly. There was a tenant who decided not to pay rent, and a landlord who was deliberately kept in the dark about her own assets by a property manager, her husband, who had every incentive to hide the non-payment from her. She turned to Dylan. Mr. Reed, you were managing the Willow Trust properties after Mr. Hart's death, correct? Yes, Your Honor, Dylan said quietly. And you never informed Mrs. Reed that her sister was 11 months behind on rent. I was trying to keep peace in the family, Dylan said. I thought Bethany would catch up eventually. Or, Judge Morrison said sharply, you were enabling your affair partner to steal from your wife while keeping her ignorant of her own financial interests, which makes you not just an adulterer but a faithless fiduciary. A trustee who breaches his duty of loyalty is liable for damages, Mr. Reed. You might want to discuss that with your attorney. Dylan went pale. The eviction is valid and warranted. Judge Morrison ruled. Miss Hart has 30 days from today's date to vacate the premises or pay the full amount of back rent $43,000 plus 15% annual interest, which comes to $6,450, plus legal fees in the amount of $12,000. Total amount due. $61,450. She looked at Bethany over her glasses. Miss Hart, if you fail to comply, the sheriff will enforce the eviction. Your pregnancy does not exempt you from contractual obligations. You signed a lease. You broke it. There are consequences. Bethany started crying. Loud, dramatic sobs. Judge Morrison was unmoved. Miss Hart, I suggest you compose yourself. We're not finished. Judge Morrison removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose, as if steeling herself for what came next. Now we come to the recording, she said. And I'll be honest, in 23 years on the bench, this is one of the most remarkable pieces of evidence I've encountered. Not because of how it was obtained, but because of what these two people said when they thought no one was listening. She looked at Dylan and Bethany with an expression of profound disappointment. Mrs. Reed, walk me through the circumstances of this recording. Sloane stood. Your Honor, Mrs. Reed placed 2 personal phones on her own property, one on her front porch, one inside her living room to record activity at her residence. Mr. Reed and Miss Hart entered the property without Mrs. Reed's explicit permission using a key Mr. Reed had refused to return after their separation. They discussed committing fraud, forgery, and identity theft while on Mrs. Reed's private property. The recording is legal and admissible under state single-party consent laws, and Mrs. Reed, as the property owner, had the right to record activity in her own home. Dylan's attorney objected. Your Honor, my client had a reasonable expectation of privacy. On someone else's property? Judge Morrison said incredulously. After entering without permission? After separating from his wife and being told the marriage was over? Counselor, that's not how privacy rights work. Mr. Reed had no reasonable expectation of privacy when he trespassed on his estranged wife's property to discuss committing crimes against her. She put her glasses back on and picked up a transcript of the recording. Let me read some highlights, she said. And counselor, I want you to explain to me how this is hypothetical. She read from the transcript. Dylan Reed. What if we just forge her signature on a quitclaim deed? Transfer the property to me, then to both of us. By the time anyone realizes, we'll have already sold it. She looked at Dylan. That sounds like a plan, Mr. Reed. Not a hypothesis. She continued reading. Bethany Hart. I know a notary who'll backdate documents for the right price. We just need a sample of her signature. She looked at Bethany. Miss Hart, you identified a specific person willing to commit a crime and outlined the exact materials needed. That's conspiracy. She read more. Dylan Reed, she's too weak to fight, too concerned about what people think. Judge Morrison looked up at me. Well, Mrs. Reed, it appears they severely underestimated you. A few people in the gallery chuckled. The judge wasn't finished. She listened to a portion of the actual audio recording, her expression growing darker with each exchange. When it finished, she looked at Dylan and Bethany with undisguised disgust. I've been on the bench for 23 years, she said. And I've never seen such a clear-cut case of fraud conspiracy documented by the perpetrators themselves. You discussed forging Mrs. Reed's signature. You discussed finding a notary who would commit fraud. You discussed selling her property and splitting the proceeds, and you did this while sitting in her deceased father's study, surrounded by his memory. She turned to Dylan's attorney. Counselor, are you seriously arguing that your client should retain any rights whatsoever after this recording? Your Honor, my client never actually forged any documents. Because he didn't get the chance, Judge Morrison snapped. Mrs. Reed discovered the plan before he could execute it. That doesn't make him innocent. That makes him incompetent at crime. He's lucky she's not pressing criminal charges, though I'm forwarding this recording to the district attorney's office with a strong recommendation that they investigate. Dylan went white as a sheet. Judge Morrison wasn't finished. I've also reviewed the additional evidence Mrs. Reed submitted, she said. Evidence of a pattern of fraudulent behavior by Miss Hart spanning over a decade. She pulled out Elodie's folder. 10 years ago, Miss Hart stole $8,000 from the family business by siphoning funds from client escrow accounts. When confronted, she attempted to blame her sister, the plaintiff in this case. She was required to pay restitution, but faced no criminal charges due to her father's mercy. Bethany's attorney stood. Your Honor, that incident is not relevant to these proceedings. It's absolutely relevant, Judge Morrison said. It establishes pattern and credibility. When someone has a documented history of theft, fraud, and false accusations, it affects how we evaluate their current claims and behavior. She continued. Additionally, I've reviewed the police report filed by Mr. Leo Martinez, who alleges that Miss Hart defrauded him of $12,000 by falsely claiming she needed money for business expenses while actually using those funds for personal expenditures. Mr. Martinez also alleges that Miss Hart falsely told him he was the father of her child while knowing the father was actually Mr. Reed, and maintained this deception to extract financial support. Judge Morrison looked at Bethany over her glasses. Miss Hart, this court cannot ignore a pattern of behavior that demonstrates repeated financial fraud, deception, and exploitation of personal relationships for monetary gain. This pattern supports Mrs. Reed's claims and undermines any sympathy your attorney is trying to generate. Judge Morrison took off her glasses and addressed the courtroom. I'm going to take a moment to explain my reasoning, she said, because this case, while legally straightforward, raises important questions about trust, family, and consequences. She looked at Dylan. Mr. Reed, you entered a marriage. You signed agreements. You made vows. And when you broke those vows, you didn't just hurt your wife emotionally, you conspired to defraud her financially. That crosses a line from personal failing to criminal intent. You managed her property portfolio and deliberately concealed information from her while enabling another person to steal from her. That's not just adultery. That's breach of fiduciary duty. She turned to Bethany. Miss Hart, you have a pattern spanning a decade. This court sees many people who make mistakes. But you've made the same mistakes repeatedly, always finding someone else to blame, always finding someone else to exploit, always avoiding accountability. That ends today. She put her glasses back on. Here is my ruling. The courtroom went completely silent. The postnuptial agreement is upheld in full. Mr. Reed has no claim to Willow House or any assets in the Willow Trust. He forfeits all rights to spousal support as specified in the adultery clause. The divorce petition is granted. The divorce is effective immediately. Dylan's head dropped into his hands. The eviction is upheld. Miss Hart has 30 days to vacate the premises or pay $61,450. If she fails to comply, the sheriff will enforce the eviction. Bethany sobbed harder. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, I am issuing restraining orders. Mr. Reed and Miss Hart are prohibited from contacting Mrs. Reed directly or indirectly. They are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Willow House or any other property held in the Willow Trust. Violation of these orders will result in immediate arrest and criminal contempt charges. She looked at me. Mrs. Reed, you are awarded full costs and attorney's fees in the amount of $18,000 to be paid jointly and severally by Mr. Reed and Miss Hart within 90 days. You are granted exclusive occupancy of the marital residence. And you have my sympathy. No one should have to endure what you've endured, and you've handled it with remarkable restraint. She banged her gavel. We're adjourned. Outside the courthouse, I could finally breathe. Sloan hugged me. You won. Complete victory. Everything you wanted. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted. Hollow. Relief mixed with grief in a way I couldn't untangle. Elodie took my hand. Your father would be so proud of you. Would he? I asked. I just went to war with my own family in court. You defended yourself, Elodie said firmly. You held people accountable. That's exactly what he wanted you to do. My mother approached slowly, hesitantly. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know I failed you for years, but I want you to know. You did the right thing. Thanks, Mom, I said. Can we try to rebuild? She asked. Not now. I know it'll take time. But someday? Someday, I agreed. When we're both ready. She nodded and walked away. Dylan walked past us without a word, his attorney talking urgently on his phone, probably about the district attorney's impending investigation. Bethany came out with a friend supporting her, both of them looking devastated. And I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No anger. Just a quiet acceptance that this chapter was finally closed. That night, I sat in Willow House, my house, legally and irrevocably mine, and thought about everything that had led to this moment. The discovery, the investigation, the evidence gathering, the public confrontation, the courtroom battle. I'd won. Completely. Decisively. Dylan was out of my life. The divorce was final. The restraining order was in place. Bethany was facing eviction and a criminal investigation. She had 30 days to come up with over $60,000 or lose her business. And my relationship with my mother, though damaged, had a chance to heal. But winning felt different than I'd expected. It felt lonely, uncertain, like standing on solid ground after years at sea, grateful to survive, but unsure how to walk. I thought about Judge Morrison's words. You've handled this with remarkable restraint. Had I? Or had I just been strategic enough to make restraint look like strength? I pulled out my father's letter one more time. Trust yourself. You're stronger than you know. He'd been right. I was stronger than I'd known. But I was also more careful, more guarded, more aware of how easily people could betray you. Was that growth? Or damage? Maybe both. 3 days later, something would happen that would test everything I'd learned. Something that would make me question whether justice was enough or if mercy had a place too. Dylan would be arrested again. And I'd have to make an impossible choice. 3 days after Judge Morrison's ruling, Dylan was arrested for violating the restraining order. He'd come to Willow House at 2 a.m, broken a window to get inside, and was found in my father's study going through the desk. The district attorney called me. And she asked me a question that would change everything. Did I want to press charges? If I said yes, Dylan would face jail time. A criminal record. His life destroyed. If I said no, I'd be sending a message that court orders didn't matter. That there were no real consequences. Episode 8 is the finale. The moment where I had to decide, when does justice become revenge? When does accountability become cruelty? Thank you for listening to Episode 7. Judge Morrison's ruling validated everything I'd fought for. Every piece of evidence, every strategic choice, every moment of doubt, all of it led to this legal victory. But here's what they don't tell you about winning in court. It doesn't feel the way you think it will. I thought I'd feel vindicated, triumphant. Instead, I felt empty. Like I'd climbed a mountain only to realize there was nothing at the top but more mountains. The judge called what I did remarkable restraint. And maybe it was, but it also destroyed what was left of my family. It put my pregnant sister on the verge of homelessness. It ended my marriage. It made me into someone I barely recognized. Was it worth it? Yes. Would I do it again? Yes. Does that make it hurt less? No. If this episode resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe and share it. Because what happens in the finale, Episode 8, is where all of this gets tested one more time. And I want to ask you something I genuinely don't know the answer to. Do you think Judge Morrison's ruling was fair, or should the consequences have been even harsher? Some people told me afterward that Dylan and Bethany got off too easy. That they should have faced criminal charges immediately. That I should have pushed for the maximum consequences at every turn. Others said the judge was too harsh. That family should be given more grace. That public humiliation and financial ruin were punishment enough without adding legal destruction on top. I honestly don't know which is right. The judge gave them both a chance to settle quietly and move on with their lives. Was that merciful? Or was it letting them off too easy? Leave a comment and tell me what you think. Not about whether I was right or wrong, but about the ruling itself. Was Judge Morrison's decision fair? Would you have ruled differently? Episode 8, the finale, Did I Go Too Far?, is available now. 3 days after this courtroom victory, Dylan violated the restraining order, and I had to decide whether to press charges or show mercy. It's the hardest decision I make in this entire story, because the question isn't whether Dylan deserves consequences. He does. The question is, what kind of person do I want to be when this is all over? Do I want to be someone who destroys people completely? Or someone who gives them a chance to walk away with some dignity intact? You've made it this far. You need to hear how this ends. I'll see you in episode 8, because the hardest choice isn't between right and wrong. It's between justice and mercy when both feel impossible.